Welcome back to Daytime Ottawa. Well, the death of a loved one, always so incredibly difficult, but I find it's interesting how little we tend to talk about death. And my next guest has a wonderful book out. It is called Grief Unleashed, and she's been doing amazing things, not only here in Ottawa, but in other places around the world. I'm joined by Dina Bell-Laroche, who is the founder of Grief Unleashed. Welcome. Great to have you here, Dina. Let's first of all talk about, because this is very personal to you. You lost your sister Tracy. As I said, I've lost people in my life too, and it being so difficult. But you decided to do something about it, right? Something to honor that memory of your sister.
Mm-hmm. I did, and it's been a journey. She died in 2001, so I've had, over 20 years to allow the grief to shift, and I've grown around the grief. So it's really, I think, important for people who are listening to not feel like they have to go out and build schools and write books. I think my main message is for people to really grieve their own way, and to give them language to be able to describe this experience that they're having is so important. Yeah,
literacy is a big part of this, and a big part of what I imagine why you decided to put pen to paper. What is it about literacy around loss that you think is missing in our lives?
Well, where do I begin, right? It's not something you opened up by saying that. It's not something we talk about, and yet we're born, we live, and then we die. And so giving people language to be able to describe their lived experience, especially when they're grappling with something, is actually cathartic. And the evidence, around bereavement care shows that when we have a supportive someone who can listen, not shame us into silence, not at least us. The true story, I was supporting someone, and she just lost one child. She had two others. And people were saying, well, at least you have two other children.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So, and people are well-intentioned. We don't know how to talk about this. And so part of what I'm motivated by is to bring more literacy, more language, to be able to normalize this experience, to honor people when we've lost someone that we love. The normal thing to do is to grieve. And then if we are met in that grief, the function of grief is to allow us to heal.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that we're going to be back to who I was before my sister died. I'm transformed as a result. So maybe a different way of thinking about grief is our highest expression of love. And we will learn to carry our grief and the love that we have for the person who's died in a healthier way, especially if while we're going through the early stages of grief, we're supported through it.
And you coach people through this. I think a lot of people would benefit so much from it, but there's not many grief coaches out there. From sort of your experience in researching and becoming a grief coach, did you find that there was many out there at all?
Yeah, actually, no. So I'm part of
I know two. I've been doing, you and somebody else. 19 years of television and radio, yeah. I've met two. Right?
Well, there's a reason I don't call myself a counselor, because right. I'm part of a growing group of people who want to normalize, not pathologize the experience of grief. And yes, some grief is more complicated than others, and we might need someone with helping professional, background who is credentialed in the grief and loss experience.
Right.
But sadly, I was at a keynote. I was speaking with the Canadian Hospice and Palliative Care Association, and when I opened up, I asked, how many of you have had bereavement specialized training? Less than 50% had.
Wow.
And these are people who are accompanying people in their end-of-life experience.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. The second thing, I'm very passionate about sport. I've been working in sport for 30 years. Okay. And so I've worked with Olympic athletes, Paralympic athletes, high-performance coaches, sport coaches. And so this concept of being a coach, right, it's to be a companion, a guide. And,
right.
and I think there's something life-affirming when we feel we have someone who's going to be with us, help build some muscles, some resilience muscles around this experience of sorrow, because loss is not just the death of someone you love. It can also be the ending of a relationship, or
right.
when we retire. I like to use the word renewalment. Like, why are we retiring people
right.
to pasture,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So when we understand life in transition, and we have a coach, someone who is trained in this field of study, who is compassionate and skillful and can listen, I don't know, something shifts.
Well, and because the relationship doesn't necessarily end either. just because somebody dies, right?
That's right. And actually, in chapter 4 of my book, I love that you raised it. We talk about continuing bonds, which is a beautiful theory that says just because someone I love dies doesn't mean my relationship with them has to die too.
Right.
Doesn't that feel true?
Yeah, it does. I just thinking of somebody.
Of course you are. Well, I'm sorry that...
No, it's okay. You're doing something else that's amazing, wind phones. This is something that you invented yourself. This has been around for quite some time.
Yes.
Tell me about the history behind that.
Yeah, so wind phones are inspired by a beautiful Japanese gardener, and he lost his cousin in 2010, and then a year later was trying to find ways to grapple with his grief. So he found an old telephone booth. Remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
And then repurposed it, put it in his garden, and then he brought in a phone. And he had the phone there, and so he could go and connect to his deceased cousin. And then a year later, there was the tsunami. And so he found his old telephone booth that had blown away, put it on a place on the island that overlooked the Pacific Ocean, because so many people were lost at sea. And then he gifted it to the villagers and the people so that they too could mourn their loved ones. So this story, there's hundreds of wind phones around the world. To my research, there may be more, but when I researched it, there's only 12 in Canada. There's one in Chelsea, à l'Orée-du-Bois, and I'm going there on Friday to visit José Chartrand in honor of her husband who died during the COVID. He was the chief chef there. And we're going to bring the lucky number 13 to Eastern Ontario, and I'm going to dedicate that to my father, Mike Bell, who died on September 1st of last year.
And where are you going to place it?
Well, the Ottawa Regional Cancer Foundation. So it feels like, cancer is what took my younger sister, Tracy. And it's taken me a while now to kind of find my way home. But I have to say, it is such a beautiful location.
Yeah.
And there's gardens there. And so we're going to find a beautiful spot there for people to contemplate, to reflect, and then maybe have a conversation with their loved one.
Nice. I love it. Where can people pick up a copy of the book?
Well, they can find me on griefunleashed.ca.
Okay.
I know.
Excellent.
Easy. And I'm Burnstown Publishing House is the publisher.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. We'll be right back after this.